Welcome to season 7 of Sal Silvester on the Future of Leadership. I am Sal Silvester, your host and executive producer. I'm the founder of 512 Solutions Consulting Group. We're an executive coaching and executive team development firm based in Boulder, Colorado. It's great to be back. It's hard to believe it's season 7 already. And at the time of this recording today, it's the end of August. And I'm looking forward to spending some time with you this fall and into the winter of 2025. So season 7 is focused on elevating human performance at work. We are exploring what leaders can do to help themselves and others improve their performance at work. Look, athletes train for events using tried and true and tested methods to enhance their performance. So why shouldn't leaders do the same? So that's really what we're focused on this year or this season. So today we're focusing on a very important topic of change. There's a lot going on in our world. And to help drive people's performance effectively, we have to understand how people respond to change so that we can put the right strategies in place to help both ourselves, because we're not immune to change as leaders, and to help others move through the transition or the change process to a better state. So my special guest today is John M. Fisher, and he is the founder of what you probably already know as the Change Curve. He's a chartered constructivist, psychologist, and coach. He is a specialist in change management, leadership, influence, and persuasion and personal development. He's authored 6 books, published 9 papers, and developed the process of transition, aka the Fisher Curve. And that's inspired thousands of people worldwide to help themselves and help others make effective and personal change. So I'm excited about this conversation. John and I talk a lot about future self, present self, past self, lots of great tips on how to improve your performance at work, in addition to really understanding how this change curve and the emotional journey of change impacts us. So let's go to the interview with John Fisher now. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sal. Thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to this.
I am as well. It's so wonderful to have you here. It's an honor to have you in conversation today, John. Maybe just to start off our conversation today, give us a little bit of background on your journey into constructivist psychology. What is it? What led you here, and how does it influence your work?
Yeah, I suppose the last part is the easiest part to answer. It underpins everything I do. It is the answer to that. I started off doing a technical apprenticeship, left school at 16, joined the Royal Air Force, working on aircraft radar systems, radio systems, aircraft simulators, but realised I wasn't an engineer. It wasn't me. Little black boxes did absolutely nothing for me. And when I finished, got a job after the aircraft simulator years in project management with a multinational aircraft manufacturing company, and started to change direction in life and did an open university degree in psychology. And what makes people tick had always been an interest from a youth. And I read a really influential book by a guy called Vance Packard, who was a journalist. And he wrote a book probably in the 50s or 60s called Hidden Persuaders. And it was about how America was moving and the power of advertising in America and what was changing there with getting inside people's heads, as it were. And that really fascinated me. That has influenced me throughout life. And during the Open University, I came across a humanistic cognitive psychologist called George Kelly, who created something called personal construct theory. And that's all about how we approach things based on our past experiences and then act as if that's true. And then we change next time we approach it, the experience changes. So maybe a quick example, you and I both approach today based on all of your wealth of experience with being a podcast interviewer, expecting it to follow a similar pattern. I've approached it from my lower level of experience in being on this end of it and expecting it to follow a similar pattern. And that will be either proven right or proven wrong. But whichever it is, next time both of us go into it, we'll expect something slightly different because this will have added to our past history. And Kelly says we're not the victim of our biography, which I find really empowering. And he says we always have choices, and it's about autonomy. He also goes on to talk, or the theory goes on to talk about what somebody called Miller Mayer called a community of selves, in that I'm a different person with my family. I'm a different person with the different groups that I facilitate their learning and development on. I'm a different person with friends. Sometimes I'm a different person in the same situation. Sometimes I'm the same person in different situations. So it's that whole context is fundamental, and we react within the context, and that directs how we operate and work. And when I first came across Kelly, suddenly it was almost like the scales fell from my eyes, and that road to Damascus experience. And I felt Kelly wrote my life, because I knew I was different with different groups of people and I could respond to them in that way. And I knew almost that what was important was understanding the other person to then help engage with them and discuss. And my project management experiences, because I delivered nothing, other people had to deliver it for me, and I had no hierarchical control power. It meant I had to rely on influence, persuasion, to get them to do what I needed them to do. So it all sort of fit in. So effectively, a constructivist psychologist coach is somebody who deals with the person from the person's perspective. Did that make sense, Sal?
Yes, thank you. I'm I'm reflecting on really two key points in here. One is how we approach our past, or how we think about our past experience, and then we act. You're saying we act on it as if it's true.
Yeah, for the next time. Yeah,
for the next time, right? Yeah,
which explains why a lot of people keep repeating the same mistakes of the past and hoping they'll work. And we allude to that when we come onto my change curve with the hostility element of it, which is keeping doing what you've always done and expecting a different result. And of course, it just doesn't happen. If we do what we've always done, we get what we always get. And Kelly says we can cut through that just by choosing just, if only so easy,
right.
just by choosing to do something different. And so part of my role is to help people see the choices they've got and the consequences of those choices to help them be more effective the next time round.
Nice. Yeah, you just defined the I think the definition for insanity. Right? Doing what you've always done and expecting a different outcome.
Yeah, love that.
Can we and maybe we'll get into this when we look at your change curve, but maybe just a quick question about that. Can we redefine the meaning of our past?
We can. Yeah, definitely. And part of it is we can either redefine it or in the past, or choose, as Kelly says, not to be a victim of it. So choose to redefine the future by not living in the past. So I find Kelly a very empowering, maybe in today's language, positive psychology type of approach to it. And it says the future's what's important, the future's what we can control. The past can guide us in how we approach it, or we can choose not to let the past guide us and approach it in a way that's different from last time, if last time didn't work. So it's a very motivational sort of theory because we're self-motivated. I motivate myself to do or to not do. And that whole, he used the phrase that I'll slightly change, but he uses the phrase person the scientist and talks about we're always experimenting with our future and then implementing changes or reinforcing our approach depending on the outcomes. So hopefully that helps again give you that broader picture.
Yeah, no, it's very empowering to me. Like part of what we're focused on this season is how do we improve our performance at work? And I can imagine that, look, if let's say you've had a difficult employment experience or a poor relationship with a manager in the past, or maybe you've been laid off, or maybe there's a traumatic experience of any sort that you've had in the past. Part of what I'm hearing here is not letting that solely define who you are, but and being a victim in it, but in some ways letting your future self define who you are today.
Yeah, very much so. And one of the sort of beliefs I have comes out of solution focus, which has a lot of sympathy with the philosophy of personal construct and came afterwards. So I think they adapted some of those philosophies into solution focus. But the way I interpret solution focus is I'm not interested in how I got here. What really interests me is how do I get from here to where I should be?
Yeah.
And by turning round and looking to the future, not basking in the past or wallowing in the negative of the past, that's what helps us grow and move on. So it's turning it round and looking forwards. And that's part of the answer to how do I develop and grow. I look to where I want to, where I can do. And I'm also a big fan in trying to avoid the word weakness, because I have weaknesses that are there because I don't like doing them. And because I don't like doing them, I won't invest time and energy into doing them. But the things I do like, I invest time and energy in. So I grow by doing things that are strengths and making them even stronger or broader. I don't grow by investing time and energy into weaknesses because that just demotivates me. I'll still do a bad job, a slightly better bad job, but I'll still do a bad job because I don't want to do them. And in manufacturing, certainly in the UK, they have a make or buy concept. Is it easier and cheaper for me to buy the component in or to make it myself?
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but I have an accountant. So I keep a spreadsheet where I just put my stuff in. And then once a year, I give her everything and she works her magic on it because I can do a spreadsheet, but the rest of it, not interested in. And I've been asked to do finance for non-finance managers development works in the past. And it's no thanks. I'll leave that to somebody who knows. I've done a bit of neurodivergency awareness training here in the UK, but I've recently met somebody who is neurodivergent and has their own company in neurodivergency awareness. So just last week, I said no to 3 days of training, but said, these guys can do it. They'll do it far better than me, and passed it on to them, because they're the experts in it. I'm just a journeyman.
Yeah, I love these concepts. So I might abstract a couple of things that I'm learning here already, John, which is, look, if I want to improve my performance at work, number one, let my future define me, not my past. So what is that future self and how can I step into that today?
Yeah.
And then number two, you said, focusing on your strengths and doubling down on that. We like to think about that as like, what's your leadership genius? What are the overlaps of where you're highly competent and passionate at the same time, and focus on that 20%, get everything else off your plate that you can.
Yeah, yeah,
I
very
love
much
it.
so.
I'm the same way in my personal business. And I'm getting better and better at this. Anything that is not really in that 20%, I'm trying to get off my
Mm,
plate, whether that's administrative, accounting, doing certain prep for client work, responding to certain types of emails. I mean, there's probably 100 things that are not on my plate because it's just not where my passion or my
yeah,
competence lies.
yeah. And why almost ruin your own motivation by doing things that dampen, that hinder your passion? Why not
Yes.
do the passion and become the best you can be? And that sort of underlying philosophy there has had a knock-on impact on feedback. I came across a model only 4 or 5, probably 6 years ago now, that I really loved on feedback. That the company I came across it in, they called it plus even better if.
Hmm.
And the plus is, what did you do well, what worked? Because in any change, moving back onto that a little bit, there's always things that worked. In the past, there's always things that worked really well, that were effective. So it's what worked really well. And the even better if is, so what could you do even better? What could you do 2 or 3% better than before? What could you change to improve it? And again, by going through that plus even better if, you look into the future, you're looking in a positive, creative sense. You're not painting people into a corner by being negative about the mistakes they made. So it fitted totally into my philosophy, and in that, how do I get there mindset, not how did I get here?
Yeah. I love
And
that.
I turn it, thank you, I sort of turn it around as well, Sally, by getting them to tell me. So the start of an 8-day training course, the start of days 2 to 8, it's what have you done that you're really proud of since our last session? And what, with hindsight, would you do differently? So at the start of every session, the groups give themselves feedback on plus even better if.
Hmm.
Such a stunning way, I find, lovely way to engage the groups and to celebrate success.
And I love that because it's such a simple model. You can use it at any
Mm,
point in time. So when we're working with an executive team, as an example, let's say they've got a 4-hour strategic, quarterly strategic planning meeting or quarterly business
mm,
meeting. Why not do that halfway through the meeting? And
definitely.
then improve
Yeah.
the second half of the meeting, or at the end
Yeah.
of your weekly operational meeting, or in a one-on-one. I mean,
Mm.
you could implement that 1,000 different ways
Well,
to
and
focused on the
going
future.
back, sorry, Sal,
That's okay.
and going back to your example, you could employ it at the start of the meeting. So, what's been the real successes since our last strategy meeting? What have we implemented that's worked really well? And
Yeah.
with hindsight, what could we have done differently for next time? And on the strategy, and then of course halfway through the meeting you do that on the meeting, so you're doing it at 2 different levels, that's reinforcing the model and the concept and getting the internal, the meta and the
Yeah.
macro type of information out of it. So it's helping them see the power of that, both against long level strategic as well as the sort of more short term meeting structure.
Yeah. I love that. I'm part of a this really high level, super great coaching group where I'm not the coach, I'm a participant in it. And part of the method that we use is that I write a weekly report every week and a monthly report every week on what happened based on
Mm,
based on my future self and based on what I was trying to accomplish and what my plans are upcoming for the next week. And part of that reflection and learning, I think it really speaks to the power of this
yeah,
idea of
very much
feedback.
so. Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
And
So, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I'm a big fan of Tad James's timelining as well. So I've got people to visualize their future self
Mm.
and then walk into it and feel what it feels like to be in their future self, to maybe reflect on what journey they might have gone through as part of that, to then come back and use that as the guiding post for the future, which strikes me as being very similar to what you're doing if you're writing these for your future self. You're setting up a series of retrospective milestones to follow to get to that future self.
I love that. Uh, I might maybe just touch on this a little bit, John. What does that visualization process look like? How do you step people through that?
Yeah, the way I tend to do it on the one-on-one coaching is is I literally get them at some stage in the room that we're in or virtually to
Hmm.
look to something about 5 years in the future or 3 years, whatever works for them, and get them to visualize themselves. They can close their eyes, keep their eyes open, just get them to visualize themselves standing there facing the person today and get them to picture what they're wearing, how are they standing, is there any environment around them, and then I literally get them to walk into that image and turn around so they're facing where they were sitting
Mm.
and say, okay, as you get comfortable, put them on like a skin. How does it feel? What sort of things are you thinking about? What differences do you notice about that? And then say, so look at where you were sat before, and if you imagine a line from there to now, you might see hot spots, you might see curves and bends. What do you think they are? And walk back slowly, stopping at each of the hot spots and just seeing what that learning is from there. And it's almost a very light trance, fairly obviously, that they're in. And some take to it better than others,
Yeah.
and then come back to themselves, sit down, and we just have a chat about whatever learning, what did they bring. Did it, I'll say recently, last year with somebody who was at a bit of a, I'd say crossroads, but it was more like in the middle of a roundabout with no idea where to go, which way to turn. And we did part of that, and they saw themselves a year in the future with a lanyard on. And so we use that lanyard as the focal point and a year in the future as the
Mm.
short term focal point. So, how are we going to get a job that has a lanyard? What does having a lanyard mean for you? And things like this that gave them focus and gave them something to work towards. And it was about 7 or 8 months after we did that exercise, they were in a job with a lanyard
Mm.
and are loving it. Sort of a year later, they're still in love with it.
Yeah. What a great exercise and an example of let your future self determine who you are today.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And there's a lot of work being done on that. I've just finished reading a book that's named Forgets Me, but the person writing the book talks about letting your future self speak to your past self
Yes.
and letting your present self speak to your future self and using those guidances. And that's part of this quantum psychology, quantum empowerment, cosmic ordering approach that he's been talking about in his book.
I love it. John, you're probably best known, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, for the John Fisher's personal transition curve or the change curve.
Yes.
Is that what you call it?
Yeah, I just call it my curve, obviously. But
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
the process of I called it originally the process of transition,
Mm.
and then it took on a world of its own. Somebody I met virtually liked the curve and said, "Can I put it on my website?" So I said, "Yeah, of course you can," and it became known from there as Fisher's change curve, the Fisher
The
curve.
Fisher curve,
Yeah,
right.
yeah, and it's just got a world and life of its own that I know very little about out there. So John Fisher's totally unknown. Fisher's curve is well known.
Yes. Well, give us maybe walk us through the curve and then I really want to relate the curve. I think it's so powerful to
Mhm.
how people can improve their performance at work. I mean, there's just so much going on in terms of change and transition in
Yeah,
everyday's world. And I see our business environment getting more and more complex. And if we can't individually and collectively figure out how to navigate transitions, I think it's going to be very difficult for us to be successful in the workplace and at home.
yeah, very much so, Sal. I regularly think on Andy Warhol's 15 minutes of fame is nowadays a 3 minute soundbite. And
Yeah.
that's how much it's speeded up. So the curve itself is about our personal emotional journey through change,
Mm.
and it's about the impact on our sense of identity. I borrowed the concept from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's bereavement curve, and I like that S shape, but I don't suggest that we go through every stage. We go through it linearly. We can go backwards and forwards depending on what's happened and how we sort of deal with what's happened. So the curve is in itself is almost just a reflection of what could be and what sometimes is, in helping. And as we start it, we've got that anxiety, and I use some Kellyan words here rather than the common language uses of them, but we use that anxiety that's a little bit of something's going to happen. What will it, how will I cope? What will it do? Will it go well? And again, to come back to the example you and I approaching this, there's that sort of thing going through my head. How will it be? Will it be okay? Will I make sense? And you probably potentially did have similar thoughts where
Of
is John's
course.
going to be okay? Is he going to be lively? Is he going to be dull? What's it going to be like? That
Right.
then we then get to great, we've now clicked on this and I've just entered the room. But then once you meet somebody, whoever's at the other end, once I meet you, it's not what I thought. Oh, great, this is going to be good. And if it's great, we have a very shallow transition across to the other end because we're straight into that rapport, into that ownership, that joint creation of whatever comes out of this. And that's part of how it works for me, is that joint creation. If it's maybe somebody you get who's maybe not as likes to speak as much as I like to speak,
Hmm.
somebody who's a little bit more internally processed rather than outwardly. So they think a lot, and you end up with the pregnant pauses. It might be things going through your mind around how can I get them to talk a bit more about that? How can I move them out of one or two word answers? And how can I get them to say something I can use as a sound bite that if it's a really bad one, and I'm sure you've got in the States examples that we've got here of where professional interviewers on the television where it goes badly wrong. And there's one famous sketch where Grace Jones actually hit the interviewer during the interview. And there's a couple of infamous ones where the interviewee got up and walked out and threw the microphone down, which then for that leads into that self-critique, that self-critical inner voice we've got that says you're not very good at this, you're stupid, everything else was just luck, that takes us further down the curve where we start potentially internalizing the faults, the problems, the issues, and we start going into, I always thought I was better than that. I thought I'd be able to change. I didn't think that was me. That leads to what I originally called depression, right in the trough. But somebody quite rightly pointed out, depression has a very, very um, strong clinical meaning. And I was
Hmm.
using depression in a light sort of common language way. So I
Right.
changed it to confusion, where we just don't know what to do. We don't trust what we've done in the past because it's failed and let us down, but we don't have a clear picture of what to do in the future. And as we start going down that curve, we tend to be angry at other people for making us change and forcing us to get out of our comfort zone. But as we get further down it and realize the impact and the scope of it is bigger than we thought, we tend to blame ourselves for not seeing it right in the first place. We then come to some point, the lowest point, I've just called it insight for the want of a better word, where we start saying, okay, I've got to make this work. I've got to do something. So let's try the old joke, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? So we start making one bite, we start making one steps that gradually reinforce and take us to something positive and working at the end of it. But I've added in 3 sort of ways off, and the new variation of the curve is showing it more as a road. And I just love the way the designer's done that road. But then has, well, I thought about roundabouts initially, but decided no, just leave them as roads coming off. And 2 of them, denial and hostility, are very, very similar in they both ignore the change. And they both say, no, I'm going to continue working as if this change hasn't happened. But with denial, there's no real energy invested. You just carry on, don't do anything, and head in the sand. But with hostility, you expand a lot of energy in proving people are wrong to change. So you keep doing it the old way. You keep using the old processes. You keep doing things that you've always done because you're going to prove them wrong eventually. And then I added one on as well that I've called disillusionment, but slightly bigger than that. That's where you come to a point where you think, I'm not prepared to compromise who I am. I'm not prepared to go against my values, my ethics. I'm better than this, so I'm going to say goodbye to them. And this is where I know I've left 1 or 2 jobs because I didn't like the culture in that role and I wasn't prepared to be part of something that was toxic. So I physically got out and changed the environment. So that's the curve in a very quick nutshell.
Nice. Thank you for that. So it's sort of that it's a person's emotional journey through any kind of change. And what I'm noticing is the curve can be flat. It can be super deep where people do really go into that trough, that valley of despair. I've seen it described as in the past. And at any point in time, people might decide to move toward acceptance, or they might decide to move out of the curve completely by just being disengaged or leaving the organization or going down some other path. Maybe a couple thoughts around what the leader can do to shorten the emotional, or maybe lessen the depth of that trough of the emotional component of change.
I think there's a lot the leader can do to help create an environment that facilitates change. Some of it is all of it's engagement in one form or another. And part of it at the start of the change is having those open discussions with the people, exploring what was good about the past, celebrating past successes with them, but also creating the argument for change. So Cotter's burning platform, basically.
Right. Yes.
And then engaging the people in creating a vibrant future, helping them be part of shaping what the change will change into, or at least hearing them about what they think could be wrong with the new future, because sometimes we can't be part of the change. So it's about hearing their concerns and then addressing those concerns with it, and then providing a route map of how to get from where we are to where we need to be. And I talk about that a little bit in one of the papers on the past, present, and future of change as a way of doing it. Because if you don't deal with all three elements of the past, the present, and the future, if you don't deal with the past, you end up with people at the water cooler talking about how good it used to be and how
Mm,
the miss dot dot dot. Um, if you don't create that vibrant future, you get people who don't know when it's going to end and can't see a light at the end of the tunnel. And if you don't deal with the route map, you get everybody going in different directions. We have
right.
the expression here, headless chicken, that's just running everywhere and
Mm,
nowhere. So it's about engaging with them. Now I've used that principle in the coaching and the team development I've done with the, the curve on the floor, got people to stand where they feel they are on that curve. And then we talk about what you need to move and what you need to flatten that dip, and get them to talk about that and use it in that same visualization way. What needs to happen for you to feel comfortable with wherever it is at the other side of the curve or with the end change. So how can you make that work? So again, it's the emphasis, how can you make it work, to
right.
give them ownership of making it work.
Yeah. So back to a couple of key points right at the beginning, the constructivist philosophy, the agency that you want people to see. And then I think this relates right back to our future self. People have to
Mhm.
be able to see themselves in the future in order to bring that into their present.
Yeah,
But I also heard you say
yeah,
there has to be some discussion, open discussion around acknowledging where we've been in the past as well.
yeah, very
Yeah.
much so. And the other thing I'd add that the leader has to do is they have to trust the people to do.
Hmm.
So they can't have the conversations and then not trust them.
Yeah.
There's got to be trust there.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think people start to become I'm not sure what the right term is in psychology, but if they know the leader is going to shoot down their ideas and do whatever it is that they want to do every time they bring up an idea, is it learned hopelessness where they just then stop
It's learned
bringing those
helplessness.
ideas,
Yeah,
yeah, to
yeah.
the table? Yeah.
It's also a massive impact onto psychological trust and
Hmm.
psychological safety,
Yes.
because people won't feel safe or trusted in that type of environment. And people tend to then leave, and you've got something else called cognitive dissonance, which is
Ah,
that little prickle of dissatisfaction. And when we do go from that perspective, we blame the old people for doing it, and so we call them for being bad, for being toxic, etc., etc. When they maybe just didn't explain it to us enough or didn't
hmm.
trust us in a way we know we are trusted.
Yeah. John, maybe one final question, which is leaders themselves aren't immune to change.
Oh,
How do we, right? How do we help ourselves through this change curve, this change process that you've described?
I, I think there's a few ways of doing it. One of them is coaches, mentors, and getting some support.
Yeah.
The old expression, it's lonely at the top.
Hmm.
Find somebody you can just use as a sounding board and help you talk it out. When I've done natural team changes, I've had the leaders talking about where they are on the curve in front of the team, and we've explored. Sometimes the leader is in a different place to all of the team, sometimes at one end, and the team's actually loving it, but the leader hasn't quite caught up. Sometimes the leader's at the end and the team haven't caught up. So we talk about what do both sides of this need. And I've given people on the curve post-its or cards, and on one side they write how the feeling, on the other side they write what they wanted from their leader at that point in time, and we share that as part of an open discussion around there. So it's something very similar for the leader. What do they need for them to navigate the change? Where can they get it from? What's their support group look like? And it's about, don't assume that your team is at the same place you are in, because they will be in a different place.
John, thank you so much. This is super helpful. Let me just see if I can summarize a couple of.
Good luck.
I took 7 key points from today. Let's see if I've got them. So, one, early on, we talked about number one, this concept of future self versus
Mm,
past self, not being a victim to the past, but thinking about that ideal future state and then living into that.
yeah.
Uh, Number two, focus on your strengths. What is that leadership genius that you have? How can you focus most of your time in that space where you're both competent and passionate?
Mm,
We talked about the power of feedback. You gave us the plus and even better if model. And we can use that in any number of
mm,
elements of our day so that we're continuously looking into the future and we're creating that positive, creative sense and not just focused on the past.
yeah.
You gave us the visualization exercise to help us step into our future self. We talked just briefly about the Fisher curve, where people go through this emotional journey through change, from anxiety through maybe anger, denial, hostility at some point, or there are points along the way where people can emerge from that into some level of acceptance.
Mm,
Maybe point six is, but leaders have a role here, and they can
mm.
help minimize the depth of that emotional journey through open discussion, engaging with people, helping them see a vibrant future and shaping what the change will lead to,
And maybe,
creating.
Sal,
What's that?
sorry, just to interrupt there,
Yes.
apologies. And I think also to the leader can also share their vulnerability as
Ah,
well. So
yes.
vulnerable leadership comes in here. So share where they're at, share their fears and hopes as well.
It really humanizes people
Mm,
at work, creates
mm,
that psychological safety you mentioned earlier. And then finally, point seven, maybe leaders aren't immune to change. So they need to find the support systems themselves. What is it that they need? Where can they get that? And don't assume that you and your team are in the same place on that change
mm.
curve.
Yeah, yeah, nice summaries.
Awesome. John, thank you so much for being on the show today. I'm very
Thank you.
grateful. I think our listeners are going to find a lot of value in this conversation.
I hope so, Sal. I've thoroughly enjoyed being on as well. And I'd wish I was as succinct as you with the 7 key points.
Thank you. It's been a very nice discourse.
Thank you.